Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the stars through the main screen. His ship moved slowly through space near the Veil Nebula, where purple and blue clouds of gas made strange patterns in the darkness. The year was 2387, and humans had been part of the Galactic Coalition for almost 300 years now. Jake had spent most of his life among the stars working with alien friends from 47 different worlds. Lisa Grant sat at her station checking weapon systems even though they had not seen any trouble for months. She was the best tactical officer Jake had ever worked with and could spot danger before anyone else. Her fingers moved across the control panel with quick skill while she watched the sensor readings. Ryan Parker worked in the engine room below, making sure their ship ran smoothly. He could fix anything that broke and often made improvements that surprised even the alien engineers. The Coalition was a peaceful group, where every species shared their knowledge and helped each other grow stronger. Humans brought their curiosity and willingness to explore dangerous places, while other races shared their advanced science and old wisdom. Trade ships moved between worlds carrying goods and ideas, while exploration vessels like the Defiance mapped new regions of space. Jake had just finished his morning coffee when the sensors began making warning sounds. Lisa looked up from her station with worry in her eyes. Something was wrong with the star systems ahead of them. The computer showed that 3 suns had simply stopped shining. There was no explosion or natural event that could explain it. The stars were just gone. Ryan came up from the engine room when he heard the alert sounds. He had grease on his hands from working on the power systems, but his face showed the same confusion that Jake felt. In all their years exploring space, none of them had seen anything like this. Stars did not just disappear without leaving some trace behind. Lisa ran deeper scans of the area and found something even more disturbing. The missing stars were part of a pattern. Something was moving through space in a straight line toward the center of the galaxy. Every system in its path went dark and silent. The readings showed that 6 more stars had vanished in the past day alone. Jake ordered the ship to move closer to investigate. As they approached the edge of where the stars had died, they found debris floating in space. Pieces of metal and rock drifted in the emptiness where planets had once orbited their suns. The chunks were smooth and clean, as if something had carefully taken apart entire worlds piece by piece. A small object appeared on their sensors, moving slowly through the wreckage. Lisa identified it as some kind of probe or message device. Jake ordered Ryan to bring it aboard using their cargo beam. The device was badly damaged, with burn marks covering its surface. Strange symbols were carved into its metal hull, but the computer could not translate them. Ryan connected the probe to their systems and managed to pull data from its memory core. What they found made them all step back in shock. The probe contained video recordings of the attack that destroyed these worlds. Massive creatures emerged from dark space between the stars. They looked like a mix of machine and living tissue. With tentacles that could wrap around entire planets, the beings moved with terrible purpose as they surrounded each world. They did not attack with weapons, but instead began to consume the planets themselves. The video showed mountains and oceans disappearing into the creatures as they fed. Everything was converted into more of their kind until nothing remained but empty space. Lisa found text files in the probe that called these entities the Devourers. They appeared every million years to clean all life from the galaxy before returning to the dark between stars. Every intelligent species had legends about them, but most thought they were just old stories. The probe had been launched by a dying civilization to warn others about what was coming. More reports began reaching them through the Coalition communication network. Other exploration ships were finding the same destruction across multiple sectors. The Devourers were attacking on dozens of fronts, and their advance seemed impossible to stop. Every world they touched became silent and empty. Admiral Helen Davis contacted Jake directly from Coalition headquarters. Her voice was tense as she explained that panic was spreading through the Alliance. Most species remembered the Devourers from their ancient history, and their first instinct was to hide and wait for the threat to pass. But this time was different because the creatures were moving faster and covering more territory than ever before. The alien leaders were sending desperate messages to Earth asking for help. They had studied human history and knew that humans reacted differently to threats than other species. While everyone else wanted to run and hide, humans had a reputation for fighting back against impossible odds. The coalition needed that human stubbornness now more than ever. Jake received new orders to return to Earth immediately. As the USS Defiance jumped into hyperspace, he watched another star system flicker and die behind them. Whatever was happening, the galaxy was running out of time and all eyes were turning toward humanity for salvation. President Alex Carter walked into the emergency meeting room deep under the Capitol building. The Human Defense Council had been called together with less than 6 hours' notice. Military leaders and scientists filled the room while holographic displays showed the spreading destruction across the galaxy. Reports continued coming in from coalition worlds as more star systems went dark. Colonel Amy Rodriguez stood at the front of the room presenting intelligence data. Her team had been working around the clock to understand what they were facing. The Devourers had already consumed 12 coalition worlds and showed no signs of slowing down. What made the situation worse was how the other alien species were reacting to the threat. Amy explained that every species in the coalition except humans had faced the Devourers before in their long history. The encounters were buried deep in their genetic memory like an old nightmare that shaped how they thought and acted. When the Devourers appeared, their natural response was to hide in the deepest places they could find and wait for the danger to pass. General Marcus Thompson stepped forward with anger in his voice. He could not understand how advanced civilizations would just give up without fighting. The alien fleets were pulling back to defend their core worlds instead of working together to stop the threat. Some species had already begun evacuating their populations to underground shelters or distant colonies. President Carter asked Amy to explain why humans were different. The colonel brought up historical files showing how humans had always responded to existential threats. While other species evolved to avoid predators, humans developed the ability to work together and fight back against anything that threatened their survival. This trait had helped them spread across Earth and later across the stars. Dr. Rachel Stone joined the briefing through a video link from her laboratory. She had been studying tissue samples recovered from destroyed worlds, and her findings were both disturbing and hopeful. The Devourers operated as a single collective mind, connected by quantum signals that allowed them to coordinate across vast distances. But this connection was also their weakness. Rachel explained that the quantum network could be disrupted using specific electromagnetic frequencies. Her team had run computer simulations that showed the right signal could break their coordination and make them vulnerable. The problem was that no one had ever tested these theories in actual combat against living Devourers. General Thompson revealed that humanity had been secretly developing weapons designed to fight unknown threats. The projects had been hidden from the coalition to avoid causing panic, but now they might be the only hope for survival. Advanced particle beams and quantum disruptors had been built and stored in military bases across human space. The meeting room fell silent as everyone realized the full weight of what was happening. Humanity was the only species willing to stand and fight while the rest of the galaxy prepared to hide. The responsibility for stopping the Devourers was falling entirely on human shoulders. President Carter asked about the military situation. General Thompson explained that Earth's fleets were already mobilizing, but they would need time to gather enough ships for a major offensive. The coalition had better technology in some areas, but their crews were paralyzed by instinctive fear. Human ships would have to carry the main burden of any attack. Admiral Kevin Brooks appeared on the communication screen from the orbital shipyards above Earth. Construction crews were working day and night to prepare every available vessel for combat. New weapons were being installed while supply ships loaded ammunition and provisions. The largest military force in human history was taking shape, but it still might not be enough. Dr. Stone reported that her research team had made another important discovery. The Devourers seemed to learn from each encounter and adapt their tactics accordingly. This meant that any attack would have to succeed quickly before the creatures could develop countermeasures. There would be no second chance if the first assault failed. Reports came in from human colonies throughout the galaxy. Civilian populations were being evacuated to the most secure worlds while military personnel prepared defensive positions. Everyone understood that if humanity failed to stop the Devourers, there would be nowhere left to run. This was not just about saving the coalition, but about the survival of all intelligent life. Colonel Rodriguez presented intelligence from coalition defectors who refused to abandon their posts. These brave individuals were providing crucial information about Devourer movements and capabilities. Their reports showed that the creatures were converging on several major population centers and would reach them within weeks. President Carter made the decision that would define humanity's future. Earth would not hide or wait for someone else to solve the problem. Every ship, every weapon, and every soldier would be committed to stopping the Devourers. The mobilization orders went out immediately to every human world and military installation. General Thompson began coordinating with fleet commanders while Dr. Stone rushed to complete her research on Devourer weaknesses. Admiral Brooks started moving ships into position for the largest space battle in galactic history. Everyone knew the odds were against them, but humans had never backed down from a fight when others needed their help. As the meeting ended, President Carter looked out at the stars visible through the reinforced windows. Somewhere out there, ancient monsters were consuming entire worlds while most of the galaxy cowered in fear. But humanity had never learned how to give up, and they would not start now. The Devourers had awakened something in human space that they were not prepared to face. The evacuation of civilian areas continued while military forces gathered. Children and elderly people were moved to the safest locations while able-bodied adults prepared to support the war effort. Everyone understood that this was different from any previous conflict. The entire future of galactic civilization depended on what happened in the coming battle. News of humanity's decision spread through coalition space and caused different reactions among the various species. Some called it brave, while others thought it was foolish suicide. But a few began to question their own response and wonder if hiding was really the right choice. The example of human determination was starting to inspire others to overcome their ancient fears. Admiral Kevin Brooks stood on the bridge of the massive battleship USS Retribution, watching hundreds of human ships form into battle formations. 3 weeks had passed since the mobilization began, and the human expeditionary fleet was finally ready for combat. Every vessel carried experimental weapons, based on Dr. Stone's research, while their crews trained constantly for the fight ahead. Commander Nicole West walked through the corridors of the Retribution, checking on her crew. The ship was the largest ever built by humans, with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But even this massive vessel seemed tiny compared to the Devourers they would soon face. Nicole had studied the probe recordings until she knew every detail of how the creatures attacked and moved. The fleet's first real test came at the Kepler defense line, where coalition forces were making a desperate stand against a Devourer advance. Admiral Brooks decided to jump his ships directly into the battle to see how human tactics would work against the enemy. What they found was beyond anything the training simulations had prepared them for. Devourer ships emerged from dark space like living nightmares. Each creature was the size of a city, with tentacles that could stretch for miles. Their hulls pulsed with bioelectric energy, while smaller organisms swarmed around them like antibodies protecting a larger host. The coalition fleets were falling back in disorder as their crews struggled against genetic programming that told them to flee. Brooks ordered his ships to attack while the coalition forces retreated. Human fighters launched from carrier ships and dove straight at the nearest Devourer without hesitation. The alien commanders watched in amazement as human pilots performed maneuvers that their own crews would never attempt. Fear was not holding the humans back. Lieutenant Chris Adams led his fighter squadron in a direct assault on what appeared to be a command node on the largest Devourer. His 12 pilots followed him through defensive fire that destroyed 3 of their ships in the first seconds. But the survivors pressed their attack and managed to penetrate the creature's outer shell with quantum torpedoes. The explosion that followed lit up the entire battle area. The Devourer writhed in obvious pain as its coordination with other creatures was disrupted. For the first time since the invasion began, one of the monsters had been seriously hurt. But the victory came at a terrible cost, as only 6 of Chris's pilots made it back to their carrier. Dr. Stone watched the battle from the Retribution Science Lab while analyzing data from the attack. Her instruments detected massive changes in the quantum field around the damaged Devourer. The electromagnetic frequency weapon had worked exactly as predicted, but the creatures were already adapting their defenses to prevent similar attacks. As the human fleet regrouped, they received an unexpected communication from Commander Elena Vasquez. She was leading a group of coalition officers who had refused orders to retreat and were still fighting in various sectors. These rebels had been inspired by human courage and were sharing intelligence about Devourer weak points and movement patterns. Elena's reports revealed that the creatures were not randomly destroying systems, but following a specific plan. They were moving toward something hidden in the dark space between galaxies. The intelligence suggested that there was a central nexus controlling all Devourer activities and that destroying it might stop the entire invasion. Admiral Brooks called a meeting of his senior officers to discuss this new information. The idea of attacking the Devourer's home base seemed impossible, but it might be their only chance to end the threat permanently. Conventional battles would only slow down the invasion while the creatures continued learning and adapting to human tactics. Commander West pointed out that finding the Nexus would require traveling beyond the edge of known space where no coalition ship had ever gone. The journey alone would be dangerous, and they had no idea what defenses protected the central command structure. It would be the most risky operation in human military history. Dr. Stone presented her analysis of the quantum signals between Devourer forces. By tracking these communications, her team had identified the general direction of the Nexus, but not its exact location. They would need to get much closer to pinpoint the target, which meant venturing deep into enemy territory. Reports continued arriving from across the galaxy showing that the Devourer advance was accelerating. More systems were going dark every day while coalition resistance crumbled. The alien fleets that did fight were using defensive tactics that proved ineffective against an enemy that consumed everything in its path. Brooks made the decision to split his forces. Half the fleet would remain to help defend coalition worlds, while the other half would attempt to locate and destroy the Nexus. It was a desperate gamble, but staying on the defensive would only delay the inevitable defeat. Humanity needed to take the fight to the enemy's heart. Preparations began immediately for the most dangerous mission ever attempted. Ships were loaded with every available weapon while crews said goodbye to friends who would remain behind. Everyone understood that the odds of survival were minimal, but the alternative was watching the galaxy die slowly. Lieutenant Adams volunteered to lead the reconnaissance mission despite losing half his squadron in the previous battle. His remaining pilots were eager to continue the fight even though they knew the dangers ahead. The human ability to keep fighting despite terrible losses amazed the coalition observers. Commander Vasquez agreed to coordinate with the remaining coalition rebels to provide cover for the human operation. Her forces would create diversions and false targets to draw Devourer attention away from the main assault. It was the first real cooperation between humans and aliens since the crisis began. As the expedition fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Brooks recorded a message to be sent to Earth if they failed. He explained that humanity had done everything possible to save the galaxy and that their sacrifice should inspire future generations to never give up hope. The message would only be transmitted if none of his ships returned. Dr. Stone made final adjustments to the quantum detection equipment that would guide them to the Nexus. Her instruments were untested in the conditions they would face, but represented the best chance of finding their target in the vast emptiness. She had volunteered to accompany the mission despite the obvious dangers. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading for the edge of the galaxy, while behind them the war continued. Coalition worlds fell silent one by one as the Devourers consumed everything in their path. Time was running out, and humanity's desperate plan was the only hope left for all intelligent life in the galaxy. The human fleet traveled through empty space beyond the edge of the galaxy, where no stars shone and darkness stretched forever in all directions. Admiral Brooks commanded 200 ships, including experimental weapon platforms that had never been tested in real combat. The journey to find the Devourer Nexus was taking them further from home than any human had ever gone before. Captain Danny Foster piloted the stealth ship USS Shadow ahead of the main fleet, using advanced sensors to search for their target. His crew worked in shifts to monitor the quantum detection equipment that Dr. Stone had designed. The instruments picked up faint signals in the cosmic void, but the source remained hidden somewhere in the infinite blackness. The psychological pressure of traveling through absolute nothingness began affecting everyone aboard the ships. Crew members reported strange dreams and feelings of being watched by unseen eyes. The medical staff worked overtime to help people cope with the stress of venturing into the space between galaxies where nothing should exist. Commander Kate Sullivan led the reconnaissance team that would make the first close approach to whatever they found. Her ship carried the most advanced scanning equipment available, while her crew prepared for the possibility of immediate combat. Everyone knew that discovering the Nexus location would likely alert the Devourers to their presence. After days of searching, the quantum sensors finally detected a massive concentration of bioelectric energy ahead of them. Captain Foster ordered his ship closer while maintaining stealth protocols. What his crew discovered through their instruments made them question everything they thought they knew about the universe. The Devourer Nexus was a living structure the size of a small moon floating in the void between galaxies. Its surface pulsed with organic patterns, while thousands of smaller vessels moved around it like cells in a bloodstream. The entire construct radiated malevolent intelligence as it coordinated Devourer forces across millions of light years. Scans revealed that the Nexus was more than just a command center. Deep within its core, massive chambers contained what appeared to be developing Devourer embryos. The structure was a nursery preparing to birth a new generation that would spread beyond this galaxy to consume others. The scale of the threat was far worse than anyone had imagined. Commander Sullivan's team moved closer to gather detailed intelligence, but their approach was detected by Devourer patrols. A desperate chase began as enemy ships converged on their position from all directions. The reconnaissance vessel barely escaped with its data intact, but the Nexus now knew that something was hunting it. Dr. Stone analyzed the sensor readings from the safety of the USS Retribution while the fleet prepared for what might be their final battle. Her instruments showed that the Nexus was protected by defensive systems unlike anything in Coalition databases. Destroying it would require getting close enough to target specific weak points in its biomechanical structure. The human fleet formed up for the assault. Personal stories emerged among the crew members facing almost certain death. Sergeant Tony Garcia recorded final messages to his family while cleaning his weapons for what he knew would be his last battle. His words spoke of duty and sacrifice, but also of hope that others would remember what humanity tried to do. Engineer Sam Mitchell worked frantically in the USS Retribution's weapon bays, making final modifications to the electromagnetic pulse devices. His hands shook from exhaustion and stress, but he continued working because he knew that any technical failure could doom the entire mission. The experimental weapons had to work perfectly on the first try. Admiral Brooks gathered his commanders for a final briefing as Devourer reinforcements began arriving from across the galaxy. The Nexus was calling its children home to defend against the human threat. Soon the area would be swarming with enemy ships, but the fleet had to attack before the defenses became impossible to penetrate. The battle began with coordinated strikes from multiple directions as human ships closed in on the massive Nexus. Squadron leader Ashley Turner led fighter squadrons through defensive fire while capital ships targeted the structure's vulnerable points. The scale of the combat was beyond anything in galactic history. Devourer vessels poured into the battle area, responding to distress calls from their central command. The creatures fought with desperate fury to protect their nursery while human ships pressed forward, despite taking massive casualties. Explosions lit up the cosmic darkness as the two forces clashed in the empty void. Captain Morrison brought the rebuilt USS Defiance into the fight, leading a group of escort ships in a direct assault on the Nexus surface. His crew had volunteered for the most dangerous mission, knowing that someone had to get close enough to plant the special weapons that might destroy the structure from within. The battle became a race against time as more Devourer reinforcements arrived every minute. Human ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced, but the survivors continued fighting with determination that amazed even their enemies. Nothing would stop them from completing their mission. Admiral Brooks realized that conventional weapons alone would not be enough to penetrate the Nexus core. The structure was too large and too well defended for normal attack methods. Victory would require the ultimate sacrifice, and he was prepared to make it for the sake of all life in the galaxy. Commander West objected when Brooks announced his intention to ram the USS Retribution directly into the Nexus heart. The collision would detonate every weapon aboard the massive battleship, creating an explosion that might crack the structure open. But it would also mean certain death for everyone on the ship. Dr. Stone made a final breakthrough as the battle raged around them. She discovered that the electromagnetic pulse weapon could be amplified using the Nexus's own bioelectrical systems. The chain reaction would not only destroy the local structure, but send a devastating signal throughout the Devourer network across the entire galaxy. The USS Retribution turned toward the Nexus core while the remaining fleet provided desperate cover fire. Enemy ships swarmed around the battleship, trying to stop its approach, but human fighters and escorts cleared a path through the defensive formations. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Brooks took manual control of his ship as it approached the Nexus surface. Behind him, crew members stayed at their posts even though they knew what was coming. Their courage in the face of certain death embodied everything that made humanity different from the other species in the galaxy. Admiral Brooks pushed the USS Retribution's engines to maximum power as the massive battleship dove toward the heart of the Devourer Nexus. Enemy fire struck the hull repeatedly, but the ship's armor held while its crew prepared for the final moments of their lives. Every person aboard understood that their sacrifice might save every living being in the galaxy. Commander West stood beside Brooks on the bridge, refusing to abandon her post even though escape pods were still available. Her tactical officers continued targeting enemy ships to clear a path for their approach, while engineers kept the weapon systems running despite massive damage. The crew had chosen to stay together until the very end. Captain Morrison led the USS Defiance and 12 other ships in a desperate assault on the Nexus defensive systems. His fighters attacked the biomechanical turrets that were trying to stop the Retribution, while his guns targeted the creature's sensory organs. Every weapon fired as fast as possible to overwhelm the Nexus defenses. The remaining human fleet spread out around the massive structure, drawing enemy fire away from the suicide. Run! Ships exploded in brilliant flashes as Devourer reinforcements poured into the battle, but the survivors kept fighting. Their courage inspired even the Coalition. Observers monitoring the battle from distant positions. Dr. Stone worked frantically in her laboratory as the ship shook from enemy impacts. She had discovered that the electromagnetic pulse weapon could be amplified by connecting it to the Nexus's own bioelectrical network. The chain reaction would send a devastating signal through quantum space to disrupt every Devourer in the galaxy. Lieutenant Carlos Mendez stayed at his weapon station even as bulkheads collapsed around him. His targeting systems were damaged, but he continued firing manually at enemy ships trying to intercept their approach. Blood ran down his face from flying debris, but his hands never left the controls. Medical officer Dr. Patricia Cole moved through the ship, treating wounded crew members who refused to leave their posts. She gave pain medication to engineers, keeping the engines running and bandaged fighters still manning their guns. Her calm presence helped everyone stay focused on their duties. Sergeant Garcia led Marine squads in defending critical areas of the ship from Devourer boarding attempts. Small enemy organisms had attached themselves to the hull and were trying to eat through the armor. His troops fought hand-to-hand combat in the corridors while the ship plunged toward its target. The Nexus began launching desperate counterattacks as it realized what the humans were attempting. Massive tentacles reached out to grab the approaching battleship while bioelectric discharges tried to disable its systems. But the Retribution's momentum carried it forward through every defensive measure. Engineer Mitchell completed the final connections for Dr. Stone's amplification device just as enemy fire destroyed his workstation. He crawled through damaged corridors to reach the backup controls, knowing that the electromagnetic pulse had to activate at exactly the right moment. His technical skill was all that stood between success and failure. Admiral Brooks felt the ship's structure beginning to buckle under the stress of the approach, but he held course toward the Nexus core. Through the view screen, he could see the alien structure's surface rushing toward them, covered in writhing organic patterns. In moments, they would either succeed gloriously or fail completely. Commander West coordinated the final weapons barrage that would punch through the Nexus outer shell just before impact. Every gun on the ship fired simultaneously, creating a hole in the creature's defenses. The timing had to be perfect or the ship would be destroyed before reaching the vulnerable interior. Dr. Stone activated her amplification device as the USS Retribution struck the Nexus surface with tremendous force. The impact drove the battleship deep into the structure's biomechanical interior, where it detonated every weapon in its arsenal. The explosion tore through organic corridors and mechanical systems alike. The electromagnetic pulse that followed was beyond anything ever created by human science. Amplified by the Nexus's own quantum communication network, the signal spread outward at faster than light speed. The pulse disrupted Devourer coordination systems across thousands of light years in all directions throughout the galaxy. Coalition forces watched in amazement as Devourer's ships suddenly became erratic and confused. The creatures lost their hive mind connection and began attacking each other instead of working together. Their perfect coordination collapsed into chaos as the pulse severed their quantum links. Captain Morrison watched the Nexus structure tear itself apart from the internal explosion while debris rained down on the surviving human ships. The massive biomechanical construct that had controlled the invasion was dying, but the cost had been enormous. More than half the human fleet was gone, including their greatest leaders. The few remaining ships regrouped in the aftermath, while emergency teams searched for survivors among the wreckage. Admiral Brooks and the entire crew of the USS Retribution were lost, along with thousands of other human personnel. Their names would be remembered as the heroes who saved galactic civilization. Dr. Stone's final transmission reached the surviving ships just before the Nexus collapsed completely. Her data showed that the electromagnetic pulse had succeeded beyond all expectations. Devourer forces throughout the galaxy were now isolated and vulnerable to conventional attack by coalition fleets. Commander Vasquez reported from the front lines that enemy resistance was crumbling everywhere. Without central coordination, the creatures were reverting to mindless feeding behavior that made them easy targets. The immediate threat to galactic civilization was over, but the scars would remain for generations. The victory celebration was muted by the enormous cost in human lives. Every family in human space had lost someone in the battle, while entire ship crews had vanished in the fighting. The species that had saved the galaxy was also the one that had paid the highest price for that salvation. Admiral Morrison took command of the surviving fleet and began the long journey home. Behind them, the destroyed Nexus continued to collapse, while its quantum signals faded into silence. The Devourer's million-year cycle of destruction had finally been broken by human determination and sacrifice. News of the victory spread through coalition space along with reports of human losses. The other species began to understand what humanity had given up to save them all. Gratitude mixed with guilt as they realized that humans had died protecting those who were too afraid to protect themselves. The battle was over, but its consequences would shape the galaxy for centuries to come. Humanity had proven that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost, while their sacrifice inspired other species to overcome their ancient fears and stand ready for future threats. 6 months after the Battle of the Nexus, the galaxy slowly began to heal from the wounds left by the Devourer invasion. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the new flagship USS Vengeance, watching construction crews repair damaged space stations throughout Coalition territory. The immediate crisis was over, but the work of rebuilding would take years to complete. The scattered Devourer forces that remained after losing their central coordination proved manageable for Coalition fleets working together. Without their hive mind, the creatures reverted to simple feeding behaviors that made them predictable and vulnerable. Joint task forces hunted down the survivors while scientists studied their remains to prevent future invasions. Memorial services were held on every human world to honor the thousands who died in the final battle. The names of Admiral Brooks, Commander West, and the crew of the USS Retribution were carved into monuments that would stand for generations. Children learned their stories in school while adults spoke of their sacrifice with quiet reverence. President Carter addressed the Galactic Coalition Council in a speech that changed humanity's position in the galaxy forever. She spoke about the price of freedom and the responsibility that came with the power to protect others. Her words inspired several Coalition species to begin developing their own defensive capabilities. Instead of relying on others, Dr. Stone had survived the battle thanks to an emergency evacuation just before the USS Retribution's final approach. She established the Brooks Institute for Xenobiological Defense using knowledge gained from studying Devourer technology. The research center would ensure that the galaxy remained prepared for whatever threats might emerge from the cosmic darkness. The Institute's first discoveries revolutionized Coalition science and technology. Biomechanical engineering advanced by centuries while quantum communication systems became far more sophisticated. The knowledge gained from defeating the Devourers was being used to strengthen every species in the Alliance. On Earth, a new generation grew up hearing stories of the day. Humanity stood alone against the ancient enemy. Children like young Alex Carter Jr. and Maria Brooks learned about courage and sacrifice from parents who had lived through the crisis. These stories became part of human culture, reinforcing their determination to protect others. Commander Vasquez received recognition from the Coalition Council for her role in coordinating the rebel forces during the invasion. Her refusal to abandon the fight had inspired others to overcome their evolutionary programming. She now led training programs teaching alien crews how to work alongside human tactics. The economic recovery proceeded faster than anyone expected as trade routes reopened and construction projects resumed. Human shipyards worked around the clock, building new vessels while alien worlds contributed resources and technology. The cooperation that emerged from shared trauma was stronger than anything seen before the crisis. Some Coalition species struggled with guilt over their response to the Devourer threat. Their leaders had chosen to hide while humans died protecting them, and the shame of that decision would influence their policies for generations. Many began adopting human military traditions to honor those who had saved them. Admiral Morrison reviewed daily reports showing the continuing cleanup operations throughout Coalition space. Former Devourer hunting grounds were being reclaimed while new defense networks were established at strategic points. The galaxy was becoming a fortress that could resist future invasions. Dr. Stone's research teams made another important discovery while studying Nexus fragments. The Devourers were not the only ancient threat lurking in the space between galaxies. Her instruments detected signals from other entities that might pose similar dangers in the future. The victory had bought time, but not permanent safety. New defensive technologies were deployed at the edges of Coalition territory while early warning systems monitored the cosmic void for signs of movement. The lessons learned from fighting the Devourers were being used to prepare for threats that had not yet revealed themselves. Humanity's sacrifice had made the galaxy stronger. President Carter established exchange programs that brought alien students to Earth while sending humans to study on Coalition worlds. The cultural mixing that resulted created stronger bonds between species and reduced the isolation that had made some vulnerable to fear. Understanding replaced suspicion in many relationships. The USS Vengeance represented a new class of warship designed using both human and alien technology. These vessels combined the aggressive tactics that had defeated the Devourers with advanced coalition science. Admiral Morrison commanded a fleet that was ready for anything the universe might send against them. Captain Jake Morrison returned to exploration duties aboard the rebuilt USS Defiance, but now his mission included watching for signs of external threats. The peaceful survey work continued, but with new awareness of the dangers that lurked beyond the known stars. His crew remained ready to fight if necessary. Young officers throughout the Coalition studied the Battle of the Nexus as the perfect example of how determination could overcome impossible odds. Military academies taught courses on human tactical thinking while emphasizing the importance of cooperation between species. The lessons of sacrifice were not forgotten. Trade and diplomacy flourished as former enemies became trusted allies inspired by humanity's example. Species that had hidden during the crisis now worked to prove their worth through contribution to the common defense. The galaxy was more united than ever before in its history. Admiral Morrison looked out at the stars from his command chair and reflected on how much had changed since the first distress calls reached Earth. The galaxy had screamed for help, and humanity had answered with such fierce determination that the echo of their fury still protected civilization. Their sacrifice had proven that some things were worth dying for. Deep space monitoring stations continued to detect strange signals from beyond the galactic rim, suggesting that other threats existed in the vast universe. But now the galaxy stood, ready to face whatever darkness might come, united by the knowledge that courage could triumph over any enemy. The Devourers had been defeated, and their lesson would never be forgotten. Children throughout Coalition space grew up knowing that when evil threatened the innocent, there would always be those willing to stand and fight. The human example had changed how entire species thought about duty and sacrifice. The galaxy was safer because one species had refused to surrender when others had given up hope.